Yeah, welcome back. Yeah, my name is Rasela Malida. I will be a moderator for these sessions. I'd like to greet all of our beloved comrades, panelists, and participants who have joined our seventh session of Socialism Conference 2021. I hope all of you could stay until the end of these discussions so that we can deliver your opinion and agree or disagree to the speakers. And so, before I begin, so please let me read the house rules to all of participants. First of all the participants are requested to respect differences in views and opinions. And second, please posting the questions in short and specific manner to the respective panel for their views. And the third one is Q&A box is not for debates, but for asking questions only. And the last is we will not tolerate any derogatory remarks, sexist or vulgar postings in the chat. And the organizer have rights to remove such participants if they are found to do so. So we have a very interesting and important topic to be discussed today, colonialism in the 20th century and the struggles for self-determination rights. Yeah, as we know that in several parts of the world, the struggles and conflict against 21st century colonialism is still happening. In West Papua, for example, over 500,000 West Papuan civilians have been killed by Indonesia's military, and thousands more have been raped, tortured, or forcibly disappeared. And the people of West Papua have been struggling for freedom from Indonesia's colonial occupations since 1963. And for over a century, we also have seen the brutal settler colonialism of Israel in Palestine that has subjected Palestine and Palestinians to a structural and violent from a destruction, dispossessions, and land appropriations. And in Jammu and Kashmir also, the atrocities of imperialist states of India and Pakistan are continuing to lead into massacre of people. And 2 weeks ago, 4 people were brutally killed by security forces in Srinagar in the name of breaking down militants, including dentists. So we have 3 speakers from diverse background today who will discuss their view on the character of colonialism in a modern century and its relation to democratic struggles of fighting for self-determination rights. And also they also will discuss the role of socialist movement in relation to this struggle. So today we have our beloved 3 speakers. First is Comrade Surya Anta, is the spokespersons of People's Liberation Party. And second one, we have Haris Kadir. He is a journalist and left-wing political worker. He works with the struggle Pakistan and was the former information secretary of Jammu Kashmir National Students Federations and also famous socialist student organizations of Jammu and Kashmir. Haris also works with Pakistan Socialist Digital Media Platform, Daily Jihad Online, as a member of editorial board. And our third speaker is Adam Hanie. He's a professor of political economy and global development at EIS, University of Exeter, and a joint chair at the Institute of International and Area Studies at Tsinghua University, Beijing, China. His research focuses on the political economy of the Middle East, with a particular emphasis on the 6 states of the Gulf Cooperation Council. His most recent book, Money, Markets, and Monarchies, the Gulf Cooperation Council and the Political Economy of the Contemporary Middle East, was awarded the 2019 British International Studies Association International Political Economy Group Book Prize and the 2019 Political Economy Book Prize of the Arab Studies Institute. He is also a founding member of the Center for Palestine Studies and active in the London Middle East Institute and a member of the board of directors of the Middle East and Research Information Project based in Washington, D.C. So each speaker will have 25 until 30 minutes to deliver their speech. And during the speech, the participants could ask questions through Q&A box. And for those who need the translations, please hit the translation button and choose your preferred language. And I will remind also for all the speakers, because we have a relay translation process, so please be sensitive with the interpreters, so because they need time to translate the speech. Without further ado, let us listen to our first speaker. Please, Comrade Surya Anta, the screen is yours.
Selamat sore kawan-kawan. Saya Surya Anta, saya juru bicara Partai Pembebasan Rakyat dan juga mantan tahanan politik untuk isu Papua. Dan saya juga juru bicara untuk Front Rakyat Indonesia untuk West Papua. Can host make me? I cannot share the screen. Halo?
Ya.
Bisa buat saya tidak bisa share screen nih.
Oke. Tech team can help.
Yes, I've given access.
Yeah, already.
Jadi saya akan presentasi dalam bahasa Indonesia. Akan tetapi yang saya share screen dalam bahasa Inggris. So I will speak in bahasa, but my share screen will be in English language. Ya teman-teman, ketika kita berbicara soal kolonialisme di abad 21 ini dan juga perjuangan menentukan nasib sendiri, pertama kita harus memahami dulu apa akar dari kolonialisme modern. Kolonialisme merupakan hasil dari kapitalisme mode production, di mana negeri-negeri merkantilis, misalnya Eropa, dalam hal ini Eropa pre-kapitalis, economic formation, yang sebelumnya masih dalam corak produksi feudalisme, bertransformasi ke corak produksi kapitalisme. Nah, kemenangan merkantilisme Eropa di satu sisi, dan kekalahan feodal-feodal lokal dan atau masyarakat tribal di sisi lain telah membuka jalan bagi kapitalisme kolonial atas wilayah-wilayah jajahan. Penyebab kekalahan tersebut, ketidakseimbangan perkembangan formasi sosial masyarakat yang menjajah dengan yang dijajah. Pertukaran dan perampasan sumber daya alam dan sumber daya manusia oleh merkantilis menghasilkan percepatan pertumbuhan tenaga produktif masyarakat feodal di Eropa ke masyarakat kapitalis, dan di sisi lain memberikan jalan bagi kolonialisme di Asia, Afrika, Pasifik, dan Amerika. Eropa misalnya lebih dahulu dan lebih cepat mengalami revolusi ke masyarakat kapitalis daripada masyarakat Asia. Selain karena total keuntungan dari hasil rampasan kekayaan atas wilayah-wilayah yang kemudian mereka koloni, yang berkontribusi atas pertumbuhan borjuis mereka. Namun di sisi lain, sebab wilayah-wilayah feodal dan tribal yang selanjutnya mereka jajah ini berada dalam kondisi masyarakat yang menyulitkan pertumbuhan borjuisnya. Indonesia prakapitalis misalnya, dengan pertanian tenancy, mengalami fragmentasi tenaga produktif yang menyulitkan tumbuhnya yang dapat menghapus hubungan produksi feodalisme. Pertumbuhan serta perkembangan kaum borjuis ini yang selanjutnya berpengaruh dan memainkan peranan utama atas kemunculan dan perkembangan kapitalisme, kolonialisme, bangsa dan negara bangsa. Indonesia misalnya memasuki masa kapitalisme kolonial sejak VOC dibubarkan dan program kapitalisme dijalankan seperti kultur stelsel, pembangunan jalan, pembangunan kereta api, pembangunan jaringan komunikasi, perkebunan-perkebunan, dan sekolah-sekolah untuk mencetak tenaga terdidik. Sejak memasuki era kapitalisme kolonial ini, Dutch East Indies, dalam hal ini Indonesia, memulai babak sejarah barunya. Kapitalisme kolonial berkonsekuensi terhadap dua hal. Pertama, terhadap masyarakat yang dijajah, yaitu di mana ada dua kelas sosial yang tertindas dan bertentangan, proletariat dan borjuasi dari bangsa terjajah. Yang kedua, batas-batas administrasi wilayah jajahan. Sebagaimana yang kita kenal sekarang, Indonesia dulunya adalah Dutch East Indies, kemudian West Papua yang kita kenal hari ini, Provinsi Indonesia, dulunya bernama Dutch New Guinea. Kemudian juga yang ketiga adalah kelahiran bangsa. Dan terhadap bangsa penjajah, konsekuensinya adalah adanya peningkatan surplus produksi, percepatan pertumbuhan tenaga produktif, khususnya means of production, sentralisasi hasil produksi dan monopoli, penajaman persaingan antar kapitalis koloni, dan perluasan wilayah koloni. Dalam hal ini perluasan pasar. Nah, kemudian kita akan masuk ke soal sebenarnya apa sih bangsa ini dalam pengertian Marxis. Pengertian yang saya angkat di sini adalah pengertian Stalin. Bangsa adalah dalam sejarah terbentuk dari komunitas masyarakat yang stabil, yang terbentuk berdasarkan sebuah kesamaan bahasa, teritori, kehidupan ekonomi, dan perubahan psikologis yang termanifestasikan dalam sebuah kebudayaan bersama. Sebuah bangsa dalam sejarah tidak muncul secara tiba-tiba, tetapi muncul dalam periode sejarah tertentu, yaitu masa munculnya kapitalisme. Dari pandangan tersebut ada 4 kategori yang menjadi syarat lahirnya bangsa, yaitu teritori, kehidupan ekonomi, kesamaan psikologis, kebudayaan bersama yang tercermin dalam bahasa yang sama. Tapi bangsa itu sendiri adalah sesuatu yang dinamik. Bangsa dapat lahir. Suatu bangsa dapat menjadi negara bangsa atau nation state, dapat juga tidak. Kemudian bangsa dapat berfusi dengan bangsa-bangsa lain dan membentuk konfederasi antar bangsa. Dan bangsa bisa melenyap ketika kategori-kategori di dalamnya tidak lagi terpenuhi. Ataupun ketika bangsa itu tidak lagi relevan dalam real sejarah perkembangan masyarakat. Nah, kita harus clear apa sebenarnya perbedaan dari ketika kita melihat, memahami bangsa itu apa, kita harus clear apa perbedaan dari nasionalisme dan kebebasan nasional. Singkatnya, nasionalisme adalah mengaburkan pertentangan kelas atau harmonisasi kelas. Harmonisasi kelas dalam satu bangsa yang menguntungkan borjuasi nasional untuk mengeksploitasi kelas tertindas sebangsanya, membenarkan penindasan terhadap bangsa lain, dan membangun dukungan dari kelas tertindas bangsanya dalam persaingan melawan borjuasi asing, persaingan pasar ataupun perang. Dan semua itu dilakukan atas nama kepentingan nasional ataupun kepentingan bersama. Sementara pembebasan nasional adalah membebaskan bangsanya dari penjajahan, kolonialisme, dan imperialisme, dan tidak menindas bangsa-bangsa lain. Sebagaimana yang dikemukakan Marx bahwa tidak ada bangsa yang dapat bebas jika ia menindas bangsa lain. Meski kaum borjuis memainkan peranan utama dalam perjuangan melawan penindasan nasional, serta pendirian suatu negara bangsa, namun proletariat dan rakyat harus terlibat dan memimpin perjuangan agar tidak jatuh pada ilusi nasionalisme yang justru akan memperpanjang penindasan kelas borjuasi atas kelasnya. Yang kedua, pembebasan nasional merupakan basis bagi perjuangan untuk revolusi sosialis. Lenin mengkritik partai-partai sosial demokrat, apakah itu di Second International ataupun partai-partai komunis yang chauvinis, yang mendukung perang kapitalis, selama ini Perang Dunia Kedua, dan mendukung penjajahan pemerintahannya terhadap bangsa lain. Bersolidaritas terhadap penjajahan di negeri lain, namun tak mau mendukung perjuangan hak menentukan nasib sendiri atas bangsa yang dijajah oleh bangsanya sendiri atas alasan apapun, semisal program itu tidak mungkin dicapai, atau bahwa itu adalah ilusi di bawah imperialisme, atau misalnya dalam konteks Papua, nanti Papua akan jatuh lagi ke imperialisme. Nah, dari sini kita memahami sebenarnya apa itu perjuangan hak menentukan nasib sendiri. Yaitu adalah perjuangan untuk mengatur dirinya sendiri dalam hal ekonomi, politik, dan budaya. Perjuangan untuk menentukan masa depannya sebagai komunitas bangsa tanpa paksaan, tekanan, dan kekerasan dari pihak lain. 3 muara dari perjuangan self-determination ini, yaitu pertama adalah otonomi khusus atau special autonomy, yang kedua adalah state federation, yang ketiga adalah merdeka sebagai negara bangsa. Pertanyaannya kenapa sekarang ini di abad 21 ini kolonialisme masih ada? Menurut saya adalah pertama, ada ketidakseimbangan perkembangan masyarakat dunia dan perkembangan kapitalisme di berbagai negeri. Yang kedua, belum selesainya program dekolonisasi terhadap beberapa bangsa-bangsa terjajah, misalnya Western Sahara, New Caledonia, West Papua, atau French Polynesia, dan berbagai bangsa-bangsa lain. Kemudian naik turunnya pertumbuhan nation akibat kepentingan imperialis, rezim atau ras tertentu di suatu wilayah, penindasan militeristik, diktatoran militeristik, dan praktek militeristik yang menindas suatu agama atau ras tertentu di suatu wilayah, pembagian dan kekayaan dan kesejahteraan yang tak adil, sehingga memunculkan pertentangan antara borjuis nasional dan borjuis lokal, kegagalan pembangunan karakter nasional, yang memunculkan tuntutan untuk menentukan nasib sendiri sebagai bangsa yang awalnya bersatu. Misalnya hal ini terlihat dalam konteks Aceh, Patani, Moro, ataupun Bougainville. Kemudian Aceh dalam hal ini di masa sebelumnya. Kemudian imperialisme mengukuhkan praktek kolonial melalui negara bangsa penindasnya, dalam hal ini Palestina, Israel terhadap Palestina, Indonesia terhadap Timor Leste dan West Papua. Kemudian apa sebenarnya perbedaan antara kolonialisme hari ini ya dan kolonialisme sebelum Perang Dunia Kedua? Kolonialisme sebelum Perang Dunia merupakan penaklukan suatu bangsa atas bangsa lain dengan cara mengontrol, mengatur, memerintah bangsa lain yang dilakukan secara langsung melalui berbagai bentuk penaklukan, opresi, represi, rasisme, genosida, penghancuran kebudayaan, dan sebagainya. Sementara kolonialisme abad 21 merupakan penaklukan yang dilakukan secara langsung oleh negara-negara agen imperialis dan tidak langsung oleh imperialis beserta korporasinya untuk menyambungkan dominasi dan monopoli atas pasar, tenaga kerja murah, sumber daya alam. Singkatnya, dalam kolonialisme hari ini, negara-negara imperialis mengeksploitasi dan mengakumulasi dengan lebih besar tanpa harus mengotori tangan. Tentang persoalan Papua sebelum kedatangan Belanda, masyarakat tribal yang sebagian besar, terutama di pegunungan, terisolasi dari dunia luar. Sementara di pesisir, pantai dan kepulauan terhubung secara terbatas dengan pedagang dan pelaut Ternate, Tidore, Kei, Tionghoa, Arab, kemudian Eropa. Papua di era Belanda adalah pada 1898 sampai 1961 adalah wilayah yang mulai terhubung satu dengan lainnya, tapi belum keseluruhan. Wamena misalnya diketemukan oleh misionaris Belanda baru pada tahun 40-an, di mana kata Wamena sendiri adalah didapat dari ketika ada seorang misionaris datang dan bertanya kepada seorang ibu, ini kota apa? Si ibu itu menjawab, ini babi jinak, Wamena. Kemudian di masa kolonialisme Belanda ini, syarat material kapitalisme kolonial mulai dijalankan di kota-kota pelabuhan di Jayapura, Biak, Sorong, Merauke, Manokwari, Bintuni, dan lain-lain. Belanda merubah kebudayaan suku-suku melalui program misionaris, dan di tahun 35 perusahaan minyak, eksplorasi minyak dan mineral pertama yang merupakan investasi Belanda dan Inggris mulai berdiri. Sementara tahun 1936, Jacques Dozy menemukan gunung emas di Esberg ataupun disebutnya Gunung Nemangkawi yang kita sekarang ketahui sebagai Freeport. Eksploitasi minyak pertama baru dilakukan tahun 46 dengan mayoritas tenaga kerjanya berasal dari luar Papua. Kemudian setelah itu juga mulai muncul gerakan perlawanan, dalam hal ini contohnya gerakan Koreri ya, melawan Belanda dan juga kemudian melawan Jepang. Nah, di tahun 61 pemerintah Belanda menjanjikan dekolonisasi dan mendaftarkan dekolonisasi Papua ke C24, Committee of Colonization. Pada 5 April 1961 misalnya sudah dibentuk yang namanya New Generat, Dewan Perwakilan Rakyat Papua begitu, dan melantik sekitar 28 orang. Di tanggal 1 Desember 1961 ada deklarasi kemerdekaan dari bangsa Papua, dan apakah Papua pada masa itu sudah sebagai bangsa? Menurut saya belum. Pada masa itu Papua masih embrionik, masih sebuah bangsa yang embrionik. Kemudian deklarasi tersebut direspon dengan negatif oleh pemerintah Indonesia, dalam hal ini pemerintah Soekarno. Tapi memang jauh sebelum itu, di tahun 45, seluruh kelompok kanan ya, misalnya sejak BPUPKI, seluruh kelompok kanan dan kelompok kiri sebenarnya mendukung penggabungan Papua ke NKRI. Muhammad Hatta satu-satunya yang menolak penggabungan Papua ke NKRI, ke Indonesia. Tetapi jika dicermati argumentasi penolakannya lebih mirip dengan argumentasi pengertian bangsa dari Otto Bauer, Second International. Kemudian respon yang negatif itu dilakukan oleh Soekarno dengan mendeklarasikan Operasi Trikora dan menyatakan bahwa negara West Papua adalah negara boneka Belanda, dan Soekarno di sisi lain sebenarnya menjadikan bangsa Papua sebagai objek yang pasif, bahwa tidak melihat ada suatu dinamika melawan Belanda. Nah, yang unik adalah yang tak banyak diketahui orang adalah dalam Operasi Trikora itu Soekarno sebenarnya menunjuk Soeharto sebagai panglima Operasi Trikora. Kalau dilihat sebenarnya kehendak untuk menjadikan West Papua sebagai bagian dari bangsa Indonesia sebenarnya adalah sebuah pemaksaan ya. Kenapa? Karena kalau pahami, rakyat Papua tidak memiliki pengalaman historis dalam perjuangan kemerdekaan Indonesia melawan Belanda dan Jepang. Tidak ada kesamaan psikologis antara rakyat Papua dan Indonesia. Tidak ada kebudayaan bersama dengan bangsa Indonesia juga. Dan tidak ada integrasi ekonomi bersama. Papua pada saat itu adalah provinsi Belanda yang berbeda dengan provinsi Indonesia yang meskipun sama-sama dijajah oleh Belanda. Juga tidak dipahami bahwa rakyat Papua juga sedang bertumbuh sebagai sebuah nation meskipun yang kala itu masih embrionik. Di sisi lain juga mereka tidak melihat, mereka dalam hal ini pemerintah Indonesia dan juga kelompok kiri tidak melihat ada 3 kelompok sebenarnya, bukan 2 kelompok. Ada 3 kelompok. Pertama adalah kelompok yang merdeka yang menanti janji dekolonisasi Belanda. Kemudian kelompok pro Indonesia, kemudian kelompok kemerdekaan yang melawan Belanda. Soekarno dan PKI hanya melihat bahwa kelompok elit Papua yang menunggu kemerdekaan dari Belanda adalah kaki tangan Belanda. Kemudian akibat dari operasi militer Trikora itu, orang Papua, rakyat Papua tidak melihat Soekarno dan PKI sebagai liberator, sebagai pembebas, melainkan sebagai invader. Apa yang seharusnya dilakukan oleh kelompok sialis, kelompok kiri pada masa itu ya, menurut saya adalah pertama berpropaganda anti kolonialisme dan menagih janji dekolonisasi Belanda untuk Papua. Yang kedua, rakyat Papua di tahun 60-61 sebenarnya berada di dalam ilusi dekolonisasi dari Belanda, tanpa menyadari kemungkinan-kemungkinan bahwa kemerdekaannya tidak akan 100%. Karena itu sebenarnya kita bisa mendorong kala itu ya, kita bisa mendorong pembangunan persatuan dengan elemen revolusioner di dalam gerakan kemerdekaan Papua, atau paling tidak elemen termaju dalam gerakan kemerdekaan Papua itu. Kemudian yang keempat adalah menyokong gerakan revolusioner Papua untuk merebut kekuasaan politik dari nasionalis yang pro Belanda atau elit politik yang pro Belanda. Nah, sejak operasi militer Trikora itu, kemudian sejak Indonesia Papua berada di dalam perwalian Indonesia dan Soekarno digulingkan, sampai hari ini sebenarnya ada problem-problem rakyat Papua. Pertama adalah problem manipulasi, curangan dan manipulasi, serta penipuan sejarah. Yang kedua adalah rasisme. Yang ketiga genosida perlahan. 4 penangkapan, pembunuhan, penyiksaan, dan pempenjaraan. Kemudian perampokan kekayaan alam, perusakan lingkungan, dan penyingkiran masyarakat adat dari tanahnya. Sebagaimana yang sudah disebutkan oleh moderator tadi, dalam kurun waktu hampir 60 tahun ini, 57 tahun ini, sekitar 500.000 orang rakyat Papua terbunuh dan kita menyebutnya sebagai slow genocide. Dari opresi, represi, penyingkiran, marginalisasi, rasisme selama 57 tahun ini oleh kediktatoran militeristik Soeharto dan kediktatoran pasca reformasi, selama reformasi, sebenarnya yang selama sudah 57 tahun ini telah membentuk West Papua sebagai bangsa. Justru kolonialisme Indonesia mengkonkretkan dan melengkapi kategori-kategori West Papua sebagai bangsa. Kolonialisme telah menghubungkan rakyat Papua dari pantai dan pegunungan, dari Sorong hingga Samarai, tidak hanya pada ikatan ekonomi politik, tapi juga memiliki tujuan yang sama, yaitu berdiri sebagai bangsa yang berdaulat. Tahun 2001, pemerintah Indonesia, dalam hal ini pemerintah Gus Dur, memberikan otonomi khusus. Tapi sebenarnya otonomi khusus itu adalah kue atau gula-gula ya, agar tak agar orang Papua, rakyat Papua tidak memisahkan diri seperti Timor Leste. Namun otonomi khusus, special otonomi, sebenarnya telah gagal untuk menyelesaikan yang sudah berjalan 20 tahun ini, sebenarnya sudah gagal untuk menyelesaikan pelanggaran HAM, menghentikan rasisme dan genosida perlahan, ataupun meningkatkan kesejahteraan, membuka ruang demokrasi dan informasi, bahkan gagal membiarkan rakyat Papua untuk mengatur dirinya sendiri. Sebab baik investasi, baik kebijakan-kebijakan politik, baik simbol-simbol kebudayaan seperti bintang kejora, dan penentuan berapa jumlah tentara di tanah Papua dan di provinsi Papua dan Papua Barat, itu sebenarnya masih ditentukan oleh Jakarta. Karena itu, pertama kita perlu mendukung perjuangan hak menentukan nasib sendiri bagi bangsa Papua. Tapi pendukungan itu tidak bermakna bahwa kita mendukung kaum chauvinis West Papua dan tidak juga bermakna separatisme. Tapi mendukung perjuangan penindasan bangsa Indonesia terhadap bangsa West Papua, tujuannya adalah untuk membuka jalan bagi persatuan antar bangsa, persatuan antar bangsa yang setara dan mandiri, dan persatuan antar kelas rakyat Indonesia dan West Papua dalam perjuangan melawan kekuatan imperialisme, serta mendirikan sosialisme di negeri masing-masing ataupun bersama. Terakhir, tanpa pembebasan nasional, tak akan ada pembebasan manusia atas penindasan kelas. Terima kasih. Saya kembalikan. Terima kasih kesempatannya. Saya kembalikan kepada moderator.
Yeah, okay. Comrade Surya, thank you very much for giving us a very insightful presentations on the roots of modern colonialism, and also give us a solid historical background about ongoing West Papuan struggle over Indonesian's occupations. And Comrade Surya also highlight the current problem of modern colonizations in Papua, such as falsifying of history, racism, and slow genocides, and etc. And this series of problems have connected politically and economically the West Papua to stand as independent nations. Yeah, thank you, Comrade Surya, for the presentations. And so let me call the second speaker for these sessions. Yeah, Haris Kadir, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, dear comrade. First of all, I would like to congratulate all the comrades of Socialist Party of Malaysia, and especially the leadership for organizing this event. Comrades, today in the 5th session of this Congress, I have been given the opportunity to speak on the agenda of colonialism in the 21st century and the struggle of self-determination, for which I am grateful to all of you comrades. I also belong to an area which is itself under the colonial occupation of Pakistan and India. About 15 million people living in Jammu Kashmir have not been given the right to decide their future. Comrades, today the capitalism is at the stage of new colonialism, of the historical evolution, in which economic globalization and monopoly are the financial features of capitalism. This journey, which began with the formation of national markets based on the ideology of liberalism, led to the search for new markets in the 20th century through direct colonial occupation of 80% of the world. The uneven economy and political growth of the productive forces and the plunder of resources, the economic crisis and the fierce struggle for occupation of markets led to the First World War. Then we saw the destructions of World War II to deal with the crisis of overproduction after the Great Depression of 1929. The devastation of the war forced world powers, including Britain, to end the series of direct colonial occupations. As a result, the imperialist powers were compelled to adopt a policy of maintaining indirect colonial domination by ending the series of direct colonial occupations. Comrades, international financial institutions, financial capital, and multinational corporations played a key role in organizing and coordinating the global division of labor. And in the backward regions, in which capitalism did not come through direct revolutions, but we implanted on an imperialist basis. Such regions, due to uneven and combined development, have not been able to fulfill a single function of capitalist nation state. That is why regions like Pakistan have remained financially dependent on the imperialist powers since day one. Imperial control over such territories has been so tightened by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank, and other international financial institutions that their rulers have not been able to make a single financial or administrative decision. This era is called new colonization. Capitalism in its beginning laid the foundations of modern nation state through national democratic revolutions and many other progressive measures. Early steps were taken to address national, linguistic, ethnic, and gender issues. However, over the time, as the crisis escalated, all these issues began to re-emerge. This path of development in backward societies was paved in a very unpredictable manner.
Hello? Yeah, maybe our comrade have a technical problem. Hello?
Yes, I think he's having internet problem.
Yeah,
So we shall wait for another some minutes, please.
yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry, comrades.
Yeah,
There,
it's okay.
there was a connection error. I would like to continue. Can you hear me?
Yes, comrade.
Okay, thank you. Comrades, this path of development in backward societies was paved in a very instead of solving the national problems on artificial borders were drawn on imperialist and strategic grounds. Historical civilizations were torn apart and states established on imperialist grounds become prison of oppressed nationalities. During this partition of to perpetuate capitalist rule and plunder, many such wounds were left, including Jammu Kashmir, Palestine, Kurdistan, which have been used to perpetuate this artificial partition and indirect rule. At the time of partition of subcontinent, India and Pakistan, the issue of Jammu Kashmir was similarly created on imperialist grounds. With this issue, the artificial enmity created between the two newly born countries to perpetuate the sale of arms of military industrial complex and capitalist plunder. The two countries have so far fought three major wars over the issue of Jammu Kashmir, while a series of cross-firing between the forces of two countries on the line of control has resulted in long series of deaths. The line of control is a border that dividing the territory of Jammu Kashmir between India and Pakistan. The partition of Jammu and Kashmir was completed in 1947 with the end of the First Indo-Pak War. For the last 74 years, the people of Jammu Kashmir on both sides have been facing hunger, humiliation, unemployment, and ignorance. More than 90,000 Kashmiris have sacrificed their lives in the struggle of independence and right to self-determination. The imperialist states of Pakistan and India are committing atrocities on both sides. Political and democratic freedoms have been taken away. Writing, speaking, and even forming a political party against the interest of both states has been banned. Indian administered Jammu and Kashmir has been turned into open air prison. Kashmiris have been massacred by the Pakistani state as a result of turning this struggle for independence into armed militancy and proxy war. Due to the oppression of Indian state, civilians are being massacred on a daily basis. 700,000 military and paramilitary forces have been deployed within the population in a small valley called Srinagar. A series of searches and humiliations at checkposts are distorting the human spirit and senses. Attempts have been made to paint the national liberation movement as a religious and sectarian movement due to intervention of both the states. Thousands of people have been killed. This series of massacres of innocent Kashmiris is still going on. 2 weeks ago, 4 people were brutally killed by security forces in Srinagar, including a dentist. Those killings were in the name of crackdown on militants. Ironically, the bodies of killed persons were not provided to their families. Their protesting relatives have also been arrested. This is not the first incident. Such incidents have become a norm in Valley, Srinagar for last 30 years. As deep and intense as the occupation and oppression of Jammu Kashmir is, the struggle and resistance of people of Jammu Kashmir has been emerging with the same intensity. However, due to the opportunism, betrayals, and ideological infertility of leadership, there were defeat every time. Today, the capitalist system is suffering from an organic crisis, and even in the most developed countries, the problems are re-emerging, which the ruling class claim they have been solved. Jobs are being snatched, social security is being cut, gender, ethnic, national, regional, and religious contradictions and conflicts are re-emerging. In such a situation, it is impossible to solve these problems in the backward countries within the capitalist system. In countries like Pakistan and India, healthy capitalism has never been able to flourish. The local ruling class could not achieve the productivity that would enable them to compete in the global market due to their rotten infrastructure, technical backwardness, and unprofessional labor. Thus, the ruling class of these regions completely failed to build a healthy capitalist state. That is why feudalism could not be completely abolished. Thousands of years old tribal system could not be abolished. Religion could not be separated from the state. Even religion was constitutionally separated from the state of India. But today we see India as the most insecure country in the world for religious minorities. Similarly, gender issues could not be solved. Even today, India and Pakistan are among the most worst countries for women. The ruling class as a whole have failed miserably to integrate society through the development of the means of production. In fact, the bourgeoisie of the region was not even capable of building a healthy capitalist state. That is why the right to self-determination of other oppressed nationalities living in the region, including Jammu Kashmir, cannot be achieved within this system. The ruling class of the region lacks the capacity to play a progressive role. The solution to every problem, from right of self-determination of oppressed nationalities to elimination of gender discrimination, is conditional to elimination of the capitalist rule. The working class of the region will have to fulfill the duties of a national democratic revolution through a socialist revolution. Today, The whole world is occupied. The living conditions of the working class are getting worse day by day. Wealth is being concentrated in a few hands. However, other regions, including Jammu Kashmir, which have not been able to decide the future through the right to self-determination, have a different and more severe nature of slavery and exploitation. One thing is common here, that all these sufferings and difficulties are fate of the workers and youth of Jammu Kashmir. The ruling elite of the both sides are playing the role of instruments of the ruling class of the both occupying countries. In return, they are looting and enjoying power. We see the same situation in Palestine. According to Lenin, in every nation there are two nations, one that exploits and other that suffers. While the struggle for liberation of the workers and youth of Jammu Kashmir is linked on class basis with the struggle of liberation of the workers of Pakistan and India. So the sufferings of the workers around the world are similar, and struggle against these sufferings becomes common. As long as capitalism exists, not a single problem in this world can be solved. Comrades, revolutions are extraordinary periods of history. They do not come again and again. Today, the global crisis has taken the form of a leadership crisis, leadership that provides the right direction to the revolution, overthrows capitalism, and lays the foundation of a new class-free society. Let's speed up the process of building this leadership, preparing for this decisive battle based on the right ideas in order to make the best use of time to eliminate all the forms of exploitation from the planet and to establish a voluntary federation while maintaining the right to freedom of all nationalities, so that the global distribution of labor and resources in the democratic disposition of the workers, that the shortage and the demand could be eliminated from the planet. By the true passion, the last victory will be ours. The last victory will be of the working class. Long live revolution, long live the world proletariat. Thank you, comrades.
Yeah, thank you very much, Comrade Haris Kadir, for the speech. Yeah, let us call our third speaker. But before that, I would like to remind for all the participants who would like to ask questions could hit the button of Q&A and not in a chat box. So, without further ado, let us call Comrade Adam Hanye for the next presentations. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, comrades, for inviting me to speak at this conference today. Can you see my screen okay? Yeah?
Yes, Adam.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I wanted to speak today on colonialism and liberation in the Middle East. I want to speak broadly at the beginning about the importance of the Middle East region to global capitalism. And then I'm going to look at colonialism and imperialism in the region, the struggles against both colonialism and imperialism through the 20th century, and then more recently at the Arab uprisings in 2011 and the conditions and struggles that have flowed from that moment until today. I will be emphasizing the nature of the anti-capitalist struggles in the region, as well as the relationship between these struggles and national liberation, and of course the situation of Palestine as it fits within imperialist rule in the Middle East. So the region I'm looking at broadly, we can see on the map here, stretching from the North Atlantic Ocean through to the oil-rich Gulf states in the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia in particular, as well as Iran and Iraq, also important oil-rich states. So I wanted to begin with looking at the importance of the Middle East to global capitalism. We all know the significance of oil and gas as the major commodity underlying capitalist production today. The Middle East region is one of the major suppliers of both oil and natural gas to the world economy. 1/4 of the world's oil production actually comes from the Gulf states, the 6 Arab Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman. At the same time, the Gulf is also an important source of natural gas. Other Gulf states, Iran and Iraq, both are important producers of oil and gas, as well as states such as Algeria and Libya. Now, the importance of oil and gas really became evident in the world market from World War II onwards. Oil in particular was the major commodity that underlay military supremacy during the war. And after World War II, these fossil fuels became the major elements underlying capitalist production, and as well as new commodities such as petrochemical commodities post-World War II. So we really see the significance of the Middle East to global capitalism becoming evident in that post-war period, when oil and gas begin to supplant coal as the world's major fossil fuel, the world's major energy source, and the raw material underlying capitalist production globally. Now, since that time, since World War II until today, there has been a major transition in the way that the Middle East oil supplies are consumed globally. Historically, through the mid-20th century, most of the region's oil exports went to the United States and Western Europe. However, since the early 2000s, there has been a distinct shift in these exports towards Asia, in particular towards China. This is true both of crude oil as well as refined oil in the form of petrochemicals and other material products. So we see a shift in the relationships between the Middle East and major global powers, away from Western states towards Asian states in terms of their economic connections. At the same time, the Middle East is also very important for other reasons beyond oil and gas. The Middle East is a site of immense wealth, partly and majorly due to the export of fossil fuels, particularly in the Gulf states, the Gulf Arab states that I mentioned earlier. So as a major market for engineering contracts, construction, the sale in particular of military hardware, the Middle East is central. The Gulf states in particular. So they are the largest market, in fact, for military exports globally today. The money that accumulates in the region as a result of these hydrocarbon exports also recirculates in the rest of the global economy. This is what I've referred to this on the slide here as petrodollar surpluses. So money, financial surpluses accumulated in the Gulf states recirculate into Western economies, into US Treasury markets, and other parts of the capitalist world market. Finally,
Comrade, sorry for intruding. Can you
Yes.
enlarge the presentation?
Enlarge.
Yes.
Okay.
Make it full screen.
Yeah.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay. The Middle East is also, and particularly in the last 10 years, a major site of violence, conflict, and uneven development. Today, the region is the largest site of forced displacement. In other words, people displaced over borders and internally within different nation states since World War II. We can see this in the refugee and internally displaced peoples that are so evident in the region. The region is also the most conflict-affected region in the world. We have on one side enormous wealth, but on the other side, enormous poverty. In fact, 31 billionaires in the Middle East region hold the same amount of wealth as half the adult population. So we can see this extraordinary polarization of wealth and power within the Middle East today. In fact, many studies say that the Middle East is actually the most unequal region of the world in the capitalist world market today. And presiding over this uneven development, we have highly authoritarian states, autocratic and dictatorial regimes evident in most nation states within the region. So looking historically, how the patterns of colonialism and imperialism in the region evolved. As with the other speakers on the panel today, British colonialism played a major role in the region. Initially, during the 19th century, British colonialism was concerned more with the region due to its proximity to India and Britain's rule in India and South Asia. So it was concerned with the transport of goods, shipping routes, and trade between India and Western Europe and Britain, with the Middle East forming an important crossroads to that global trade. However, with the rise of oil to the center of global capitalist production through the early part of the 20th century, and particularly after World War II, we see a shift away from British colonialism towards the United States as the dominant imperial power in the region. The United States replaces Britain and France, British and French colonialism, as the dominant power in the Middle East. Now, this was closely connected to the emergence of Arab nationalist struggles in the earlier 20th century and other independence movements. In particular, we should highlight the struggles in Egypt around Nasser, as well as other struggles in Iraq and Syria for national independence. Like the other speakers on the panel highlighted in their presentations, these nationalist movements tended to be led by bourgeois forces, emerging bourgeois forces, as well as military elements of the military. So in many cases, national liberation came through military coups. This was certainly the case in Egypt, as well as Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere. Important base in the military that therefore then led to the consolidation of a national economy and a national bourgeoisie. Now, with this transition away from British colonialism to the United States as the dominant imperial power, the United States' broad strategy through the 1960s, 1970s, and through till today rested upon three key pillars, three key alliances. The first of these, up until the 1979 Islamic Revolution, was Iran. Iran was a major global oil producer. It also had a very strong relationship with the United States up until 1979. The United States backed the Iranian monarchy, a very repressive monarchy, and supported the Pahlavi dynasty in Iran up until they were overthrown with the Islamic Revolution. That's the first pillar. The second pillar were the Gulf states and remain the Gulf states, in particular Saudi Arabia as the major oil producer in the region. The United States built a very strong relationship with the Saudi dynasty, backing it politically, militarily, developing close economic ties with Saudi Arabia, and basically trying to foster Saudi Arabia as the major Arab power within the Middle East. And finally, and very importantly, the third pillar of US strategy in the Middle East has been Israel. Israel was formed in 1948 through the expulsion of 3/4 of the Palestinian population at that moment, who became refugees. Those Palestinians expelled became refugees, many scattered throughout the rest of the Middle East and neighboring Arab states. Because Israel was founded as a settler colony, based on that expulsion of the Palestinian population, it has been a particularly useful ally for the United States in the region. This is why the United States has fully supported Israel since particularly 1967, when a war between Israel and other Arab states saw Israel deal a very severe blow to the Arab nationalist movements in the region. And it was from that moment on that the US built this strong alliance with Israel, seeing it as its major ally in the region alongside the Gulf. Now, from the 1980s onwards, particularly after the 1979 revolution in Iran, US and Western European states have also supported other authoritarian rulers in the Arab states, particularly in Egypt, Tunisia, and elsewhere. Through the 1980s and from the 1980s onwards, there was, as with everywhere else in the world, a sustained push by the World Bank and International Monetary Fund towards neoliberal reforms in the region. This involved a similar tranche of policies, privatization, free trade agreements, deregulation of markets, in particular labor markets, cutbacks to government spending, subsidies, and public sector employment. Now, this process that began in the early 1980s really accelerated through the early 2000s, and it was built or driven through a close alliance between the World Bank, IMF, and authoritarian governments in Arab countries. In particular, Egypt was the key site where neoliberal reforms were the deepest and most extensive. The outcomes, again, not unique to the Middle East, were high levels of poverty and inequality, as I mentioned earlier, high levels of informal labor, informal work, dispossession of rural populations and very large movements, rural to urban movements, high levels of urban poverty. Importantly, also, and exposure to global crises. So when particular economic global downturns have taken place, for example, in 2008, 2009 with the global crash, the Middle East was severely affected by these downturns. And it looks likely that will continue with the current situation with the pandemic. Very importantly, we see also through the neoliberal process, through the neoliberal period, a strengthened role of Gulf capitalism in the region itself. One of the main beneficiaries of neoliberal reform were large capitalist conglomerates headquartered in the Gulf states, in particular Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. These conglomerates took major stakes in other Arab countries through the privatization and opening up of other regional states. Now, one of the outcomes of this neoliberal process, as well as closely connected to the global crisis of 2008, 2009, were a series of uprisings that began in Tunisia in December 2010, spread throughout the region through 2011 and following years. These uprisings were mass popular struggles. They were aimed at both political change, attempting to get rid of authoritarian rule, but also attempting to address the outcomes of inequality, poverty, and the neoliberal period with demands around social justice and around improved economic outcomes. Now, these uprisings began in Tunisia and Egypt, where authoritarian rulers were ousted, but they spread quickly throughout the rest of the region: Libya, Bahrain, Syria, Yemen, and other Arab states where similar kinds of mobilizations took place. In response to these protests, which really destabilized the region from 2011 onwards, foreign intervention was a major feature, including by the United States in particular, as well as other emerging powers such as Russia. This was particularly evident in the case of Syria. We also saw the rise of religious fundamentalist forces, in different forms. The new authoritarian governments coming to power in places like Egypt, and the civil war and conflicts that I spoke of earlier, in particular in Syria, Libya, and Yemen. Now, I'll come back to the current situation, political situation, in a second. I just want to look at a few of the current social and economic trends. We see, as I mentioned, massive economic polarization, both within nation states as well as across the Middle East region. The income share of the top 1% stands at about 30% of income throughout the whole of the Middle East region. This is much higher than Western Europe, the United States, Brazil, South Africa, China, and India. So we can see this economic polarization, which has really accelerated in the wake of 2011. This, as I said, is a polarization of wealth that takes place both inside countries, but also across the region itself. It's important here to introduce the impact of the COVID pandemic, which has widened the gaps in the region, leading to some extremely high levels of youth unemployment and youth alienation, a very low labor force participation for women, very high poverty rates, food insecurity, and high levels of government debt. So the pandemic crisis is increasing these contradictions of capitalist development and these polarization associated with capitalist development in the region. And we can see this also reflected, as with elsewhere in the world, in massive inequalities around the vaccine distribution. So coming out of the pandemic, we're likely to see this kind of two-track recovery emerge in the Middle East. Now, the other very clear feature of the current situation is the growing economic power that I referred to earlier of the Gulf states in neighboring economies. Now, what does this mean politically? The first thing to say is that there is evident from 2011, but also even clearer today, that there is a deep crisis of bourgeois political legitimacy. In other words, the existing elites, both political and capitalist elites, are incapable of resolving the problems of development, incapable of resolving this polarization, and are no longer able to build ideological consensus or hegemony within the region. In numerous countries, Lebanon is a very clear example, Tunisia is another example, we see a deep crisis of the political system. Now, this has been reflected in a range of important new political struggles and revolutions that emerged just prior to the pandemic itself. These struggles in Lebanon, Iraq, Algeria, Sudan, and Tunisia were important because they involved the mobilization of tens of thousands of people, in particular young activists involved in politics for the first time, and who perhaps weren't involved in the 2011 struggles. These activists were also clearly opposed to the sectarian patterns of political rule in places like Lebanon and Iraq. They opposed the intervention of regional powers, such as the Gulf states, as well as Iran, in their regional within their national political systems. And they undertook new forms of mobilization, including important feminist movements and other kinds of struggles. So these movements, these political struggles that emerged in 2019 and 2020 were really important in the sense that they reflected the ongoing problems with capitalism in the region, but had brought in new actors, new political social movements. Now, these movements were cut short because of the pandemic, but they still continue. In 2021, this year, we can see renewed struggles, particularly Sudan is a clear example, Tunisia is another example, new mobilizations on the street. Now, while these struggles are very important, they also highlight the tension that I referred to earlier about the relationship between socialist politics and the more nationally centric or movements that are led by bourgeois political forces. This is a tension that still exists in the region and has not been resolved. So even though we have important socialist organizations, left-wing organizations in the countries I've mentioned on this slide, they don't necessarily lead the political struggles that I've mentioned in the region today. At the same time, there's a complex realignment of the regional system itself, where we have seen since 2016 in particular, an overt alliance between the main Gulf states and Israel. So these pillars of US power that I spoke of earlier have become even institutionalized or formally recognized through open political negotiations and political agreements between the Gulf and Israel itself. This is a very important realignment. It threatens to undermine the importance of the Palestinian struggle, And even though it has been rejected by the Palestinian political movements, it remains a very destructive tendency today, because the Gulf states continue to be major financial backers of different political forces in Palestine. I mentioned another part of the regional alignment is the involvement of Iran and Turkey, attempting to project their own regional hegemony alongside the Gulf states. And all of this takes place in the context of a relative decline in US power and the involvement of other major global states, in particular Russia and China. Now, just to end with some of the tasks and solidarity associated with these developments, I would emphasize the importance of solidarity, in particular links with grassroots campaigns, grassroots struggles, popular movements that we see and that I've mentioned in some of those countries, Arab countries, over recent years. It's very important, I think, that these people-to-people or worker-to-worker links are built and established, because very often, particularly with Asia, the links between struggles in the Middle East and left-wing movements in the Middle East tend not to be as developed with Asian left movements as opposed to left movements in Western Europe or in nearby Africa or South Asia. So the importance of solidarity in these kind of worker-to-worker links, I think, is very important. There are a range of debates that I think it's important to have clarity around, in particular to center capitalism as the major obstacle in the region, not to fall back on religious explanations or tribal explanations or sectarian violence.
3 minutes left.
Yes, as the major explanation for development in the region. Part of that is also a clarity around imperialism, whether that be Western imperialism or the destructive role of other foreign powers, including Russia and other regional capitalist powers, the Gulf, Israel, Iran, Turkey, in politics for the Middle East. The significance of Palestine, as I've emphasized throughout this presentation, is key because of the settler colonial nature of Israel and its particular role in US power in the region, and this means supporting the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. Finally, I think it's very important that we consider the role of migrant workers and refugee struggles in the Middle East politics today. In the Gulf states in particular, more than half of the labor force in each of the Gulf states is made up of migrant workers. And the question of migration, migrant struggles, and worker struggles is often, I think, left out of left analyses and left understanding and left solidarity with the struggles in the Middle East. So I will end it there, and thank you again, comrades, for allowing me to participate in this workshop.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Comrade Adam, for very fruitful explanations, especially your highlight about the relation between oil-centered global capitalism and its impact to current imperialism and modern colonialism in regions. And also thank you for your reminder on the importance of solidarity that links to the grassroots movement. So now this is a time for Q&A. So we have several questions in the Q&A box. So I will read the questions and I will call a specific speaker that is intended for the questions. The first is questions from Leonie Tanggama. It is the question for Comrade Surya. Surya used the metaphor of the sweet or gula-gula to describe the artificial special autonomy law that is being imposed on West Papua continuously since 2001, after decades of similar so-called development programs. To expand on that image, it is indeed like the sugar coating that Indonesia used to convince its capitalist financiers that it is doing good things in West Papua. Could Surya expand on that a little, on how the Papuans are fighting to denounce this sugar coating of fake solutions to the real issue, an issue of the rights to self-determination and rights to decide on your own future and on your own land. And the second question is still for Comrade Surya. Is it an offense from Louis van Burley? Is it an offense for any Indonesians to express his support for sovereignty to be returned to West Papuans? Still from Louis van Burley. It's only a comment that Saudara Surya Anta, your comments on Papuan asking to Indonesia to return its sovereignty and to its people. And for all the speakers, there is a question from Rayhana Mohide. First for Adam, can you elaborate a little bit more on the implications of economic weight of Asia, including China, on the politics of the regions relatedly, and relatedly, does China play a progressive role here? And also it's for Adam and for all the speakers. I think can Syria be considered an important anti-imperialist regime? And if I'm not wrong, I saw questions. From PSM member. It's also for it's especially for Haris. Is there an economic reason that India and Pakistan refuse self-determination for Jammu, Kashmir, and resources? Yeah. So I will call Surya first to answer. I think there are about 3 questions from the Q&A box. So, Comrade Surya, please.
Ya, terima kasih Kakak Leoni Tanggama atas pertanyaannya. Kakak Leoni Tanggama ini salah satu anggota dan pemimpin dari organisasi Papua Merdeka. Otonomi khusus itu sebenarnya di satu sisi diakui atau tidak diakui oleh pemerintah Indonesia, sebenarnya cerminan bahwa Papua itu tidak layak untuk menjadi bagian dari atau bukan bagian dari bangsa Indonesia sebenarnya. Tapi supaya tidak berpisah, maka dikasihlah otonomi khusus itu. Nah, namun otonomi khusus ini, special otonomi ini sebenarnya cuman manipulasi saja. Kenapa? Karena pertama, tidak ada demokrasi di Papua. Kita akan tetap bisa melihat, kita masih bisa melihat adanya unlawful killing di Papua. Aktivis-aktivis yang diculik, kemudian mayatnya dibuang ke laut, ataupun hilang tanpa jejak sampai sekarang, ataupun aktivis yang sedang jalan di tengah malam dan ditabrak, ataupun dibuat dia seolah-olah gantung diri, ataupun aktivis yang dikriminalisasi karena dikriminalisasi dengan pasal makar. Nah, jadi identitas dia, misalnya identitas dia soal bintang kejora, yang Belanda sendiri dulu mengakuinya sebagai Landsvlag, bendera tanah air, gitu ya. Pemerintah Indonesia dan aparatus kekerasan Indonesia, TNI dan Polri, justru menganggap itu sebagai ancaman, sebagai bentuk makar, sebagai treason. Jadi itu baru dalam soal aspek demokrasi. Belum lagi dalam bagaimana kita jurnalis-jurnalis Indonesia ataupun jurnalis internasional sangat kesulitan untuk bisa masuk dan menceritakan situasi Papua dengan cara objektif. Ataupun juga kita ketahui juga ada internet blog di Papua. Jadi untuk demonstrasi-demonstrasi yang damai sekalipun, Papua sebenarnya sangat kesulitan untuk bisa berekspresi dan berpendapat. Nah, belum lagi pembagian kekayaan tentu sangat lebih besar terhadap Jakarta, terhadap pemerintah pusat. Keberadaan gubernur, keberadaan DPR Papua atau Majelis Rakyat Papua sebenarnya tidak cukup efektif untuk bisa dikatakan bahwa mereka punya wewenang spesial otonomi, wewenang kekhususan yang spesial begitu. Kenapa? Karena semuanya masih didikte oleh Jakarta. Nah, jadi di pemerintah Indonesia memberikan otonomi khusus, tapi otonomi khususnya dibuat sangat kerdil sekali, sehingga bahkan terakhir pemerintah Indonesia memperpanjang otonomi khusus itu sendiri dan mencoba untuk memfragmentasikan Papua dengan kedepannya Papua menjadi lebih dari 2 provinsi. Kedepannya akan ada Papua Selatan, Papua Timur. Jadi pemecahan-pemecahan ini dalam upaya untuk menghambat perjuangan bangsa Papua dan menghambat pertumbuhan karakter kebangsaan dari Papua itu sendiri. Apa yang sudah dilakukan oleh teman-teman Papua, sebenarnya mereka sudah melakukan dengan cara membuat petisi rakyat Papua. Ini sebuah inisiatif yang sangat bagus. Kenapa? Karena melibatkan rakyat untuk bersikap. Ya. Mereka membuat petisi dan ada 700.000 petisi, 700.000 yang menandatangani penolakan terhadap otonomi khusus itu sendiri, tetapi lagi-lagi semuanya didikte oleh Jakarta. Jakarta dalam hal ini pemerintah pusat gitu ya, memutuskan secara sepihak masa depan Papua tanpa merujuk terhadap 700.000 penandatanganan petisi rakyat Papua yang menolak otonomi khusus itu. Jadi sekali lagi Papua, nasib Papua ditentukan oleh penjajahnya. Sebagaimana ketika 15 Agustus 1962, nasib Papua ditentukan oleh Amerika, kemudian Indonesia, dan juga pemerintah Belanda. Penjajah lama dan calon penjajah baru, serta pemerintah imperialis itu sendiri. Nah, apa yang terjadi terhadap kami yang bersolidaritas? Gitu ya. Tentu solidaritas terhadap Papua ini sama seperti solidaritas terhadap Timor Leste, mendapatkan ancaman-ancaman yang besar. Saya sendiri mengalami pemenjaraan, dan untuk pertama kalinya orang Indonesia yang bersolidaritas dikenai pasal makar dalam sejarah 60 tahun ini. Teman-teman kami, misalnya salah satu peserta di sini juga ada yang ditangkap, yang dibawa ke markas tentara dan dipukuli di markas tentara, ataupun ada juga 6 mahasiswa di Ternate yang bersolidaritas terhadap Papua, mereka di DO dari kampus, ataupun juga ancaman-ancaman ke rumah-rumah masing-masing. Polisi ataupun tentara mengintimidasi keluarganya supaya mereka tidak bersolidaritas terhadap Papua. Tapi yang terjadi terhadap kawan Veronica Koman yang juga dikriminalisasi dan saat ini tidak bisa kembali di pengungsian politiknya di Australia, dan terakhir keluarganya sendiri mendapatkan intimidasi dengan dikirimi bom petasan gitu, di rumahnya. Nah, ancaman-ancaman seperti ini mungkin akan terus terjadi ya, meningkat. Kenapa? Karena tentara dalam hal ini kekuatan yang paling signifikan dalam represi di Papua selain polisi, memperbesar wilayah konfliknya tidak hanya di Duga, Kabupaten Duga, tapi juga di beberapa titik seperti Mebrat, di Kabupaten Mebrat, di Kabupaten Pegunungan Tinggi, di Kabupaten Timika, dan beberapa tempat-tempat lainnya. Jadi wilayah konflik di Papua itu semakin besar, dan memang latar belakangnya adalah investasi internasional yang harus diamankan oleh TNI dan Polri. Kita
Surya, 2 minutes more.
kita akan melihat jika kita tidak memperbesar dukungan terhadap solidaritas internasional terhadap Papua, kita akan melihat orang-orang Papua semakin sedikit. Sekarang ini total populasi Papua sebenarnya hanya 48,99% dari total penduduk di Papua itu sendiri. Jika kelompok gerakan internasional tidak segera bersikap, maka kita akan melihat bagaimana orang-orang Papua akan banyak yang terbunuh dan mungkin akan hilang dari muka bumi ini. Terima kasih.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Comrade Surya, for the answer. Because we have interpretation problem, so maybe I will try to explain a little bit more about the explanations of Surya. Surya highlighted that the current special autonomy law doesn't work in Papua because there is no democracy, and also that the Indonesians, that people that try to support the West Papuan movement is now facing a threat and also an intimidations. And also Surya thinks that in the future, the current conflict will getting bigger and bigger because the purpose of this colonization is to secure the international investment. So thank you, Comrade Surya, for the answer. So we are going to the second response from Haris. So Haris, there is several questions for you. First is from PSM member. Is there an economic reason that India and Pakistan refused itself self-determination for Jammu and Kashmir? And so only one question, I think. Yeah, please. And also from anonymous attendees, can Syria be considered an important anti-imperialist regime? Maybe you have an insight about these questions. So please, Comrade Hadir, the time is yours. Maybe you have to, it's only for like 5 minutes for the response, 5 or 7 minutes.
Okay. First of all, in question, he asked me about the resources of Jammu Kashmir. There are not such resources, developed resources of Jammu and Kashmir, but more thing is that Jammu and Kashmir has a strategic importance because it connects Pakistan with China. But in Indian held side of Jammu and Kashmir, there is some developed horticulture. Other resources are like water, rivers, forest, glaciers, and some herbs and other resources, but they are not developed. There is no such development in factories, in economy, like there is no resources of employment. Most of the employment of Jammu and Kashmir is based on expatriates, like most people rely on UAE, Arab countries, Europe, and USA and other countries to earn and make money. But I think the main reason of not giving self-determination of Jammu Kashmir by Pakistan and India is also economic, because the use of two big armies without this issue will not be justified. These two countries need an enmity amongst each other to survive the capitalist rule. So the Jammu Kashmir issue is a key to escalate this enmity. This issue is also in favor of imperialist powers like US and same like UK, because the British imperialist power has created this issue. Because of this issue, because if this issue if is resolved, their indirect rule in this region and strategic issues will not be will no more. People of subcontinent has their common culture and many other things from centuries, so that they can't more be enemies of each other, and they can challenge the system of these two artificial states without any artificial enemy. I would also like to answer about militancy, like we saw militancy in Jammu and Kashmir also, and there is a question about Maoist struggle in India, Naxalites, and other militant struggles. I think in this global capitalism, no militant struggle can be achieved its goal, because the militancy isolates you from the masses, the people, and Maoist struggle is also is in a closed street. They are running for nothing. They will have to choose the path of political movement for abolishing the capitalism and imperialist rule, and so that the Kashmiris are also they lost many lives due to this militancy, but they gain nothing because the imperialist powers and Pakistan and Indian states, they got their their interests in this militancy, but the people they got atrocities, they lost their lives, their households, they lost their villages, and earn nothing. So that we believe on political movement on the basis of working class, that can be emerged in this region, and can be flourished, can be spread throughout the subcontinent in Pakistan and India, and we think that the working class is has the potential to abolish this system, abolish this colonialization, and abolish
Conrad, 2 minutes
these
left.
all modalities. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for the answer. And now, yeah, actually we have several questions for Comrade Adam, but I will maybe only select 1 or 2 questions, and let us see if we still have a chance to answer the rest of the questions. So I will, from Aday Opcham, Adam, would the transition to renewable energy sources affect imperialist strategies toward the Middle East and the importance of the Arab states vis-a-vis other countries in the Middle East?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for these questions. Very good questions indeed. Firstly, on Rehana's question about China, yeah, as I mentioned, there has been a definite shift in the last 10 years or so in where the Gulf's oil exports, or the Middle East oil exports go, much more towards Asia and China in particular. But it's not just oil that we need to think about here. There's also important financial connections that are emerging between China and the Middle East. For example, China's One Belt, One Road project, the headquarters, the regional headquarters for the 4 Chinese banks involved in the One Belt, One Road project are actually located in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. So this means that the financial dimensions to the One Belt, One Road project are essentially coordinated from the Gulf, and this includes financial involvements in Africa, in South Asia, as well as the broader Middle East. So we can see, in terms of China's regional or global expansion, the Middle East does play a very significant role. In particular, the Gulf states play a very particular role that is beyond simply the question oil. China's first and only military base is located in Djibouti, and the location of that base is again very strategically very important because of its proximity to the Suez Canal and the Arabian Peninsula. So we see a struggle between China, the United States, as well as the Gulf states actually, over a kind of hegemonic control around that zone of water and those territories. So a lot of, I think you can explain the war on Yemen by Saudi Arabia and the UAE is in relation to attempting to control that space for trade routes and so forth through the Suez up into the Mediterranean region. So we can certainly see these new economic relations. China also has industrial zones located in Egypt, factories located in Egypt, so we can see increased foreign investment. But I would say we need to be clear that the United States remains the dominant global power in the region, and it's particularly important militarily. The United States has the main military presence in the Middle East, and this is something that China cannot and does not replicate up till now. There was a question about Syria, and I would say very definitively, no, the Syrian regime is not an anti-imperialist power. In fact, historically, it's collaborated with the United States in CIA rendition flights. It's played a very destructive role historically in the region, particularly towards Palestinian struggles in Lebanon, for example. The Syrian regime is responsible for the mass destruction of the country since 2011. Now, this doesn't in any way mean that we should support the United States or Western imperialism in the region, but it's quite possible to oppose the Syrian regime while being firmly against any kind of imperialist intervention in the Middle East. But I do think it's important that we're clear about the character of the regime in Syria, and also be clear that the role that Russia and Iran play in Syria has been extremely destructive, and I think the left needs to be against those kinds of interventions in the region as well. The question around renewable energy from Dayub Chang is an excellent question. There's certainly a push by, and interestingly, a push by the oil-rich states in the Middle East, in particular Saudi Arabia and the UAE, United Arab Emirates, to gain a share of the renewable energy market. So we can see some very large projects and corporations in the renewable energy sphere coming from the Gulf. And it's clear that they are seeing this as a very important market in terms of their regional involvement. At the same time, the oil industry continues to play a central role in global capitalism, unfortunately, obviously, for the future of the planet. And I don't think that there's going to be, there doesn't seem to be any indication from the Gulf oil producers that they are attempting to move away from oil. So in that sense, I think as climate activists and as ecological activists, we need to be, I think, much clearer on the role that the Gulf states and the Middle East play in the oil economy, and not simply focus solely on Western oil companies or Western states, because companies like Aramco, the Saudi oil firm, is a major oil producer and bears extreme culpability for climate change today.
Yeah, thank you very much for Comrade Adam for the uh, yeah, for the explanation. So because we have a very limited time, so maybe this is all the end of our sessions. But we still have a sessions for tomorrow. There will be 2 more sessions, session 8 and 9, on the agrarian questions in the socialist transitions, and the last sessions will be about the left and the elections and contradictions and the challenge. And also tomorrow we will have a keynote speech from Vijay Prashad on the challenge faced in the transitions to socialism and Latin America and Cuba. So I would like to thank for everyone who have joined discussions and wait until the end and give